So let's pick up with where we left off on analyzing arguments and take a look at the kinds of language tricks we might see that we need to be aware of so we're sharp in analyzing arguments. So let's start first with a euphemism. So let's define a euphemism as the extracting of emotion more than should be. So think about how when battlefield incident, battlefield loss of life is reported, that is described as an incident, or something happens in an inner city instead of someone's death occurring. It's called an incident. And if this happens on a battlefield and it is our own troops' weaponry that causes the loss of life, that's called sometimes called friendly fire, actually often called friendly fire. So we want to be aware of this extraction of the emotion so that we don't look at something too coolly. So let's move on to what's called a semantic ambiguity. Suppose we saw this headline to a article, "Home delivery sought," or to an advertisement, let's say. Does the word delivery or home delivery refer to birth, giving birth at home, or does home delivery refer to getting looking for someone who will deliver packages to homes? So let's look now at the syntactic ambiguity and read this sentence. Robert is profoundly upset because Jim broke promises he made to his wife. So when we read this, we go, well, to his wife, is that promises that Jim broke to Jim's wife, or that promises that Jim broke to Robert's wife? We don't know because this sentence is ambiguous. So in this blackboard, we're looking at what's called the fallacy of equivocation. Equivocation, we're going to define here as a subtle shift in meaning. So let's take a look at this letter, or excerpt from a letter that was sent into the New York Times. In letters to the editor, you often find fallacious reasoning. So Micah, referring to someone else, says he endured persecution because of his beliefs, but as an atheist, by definition, has no beliefs, so Micah could not have been persecuted. So we know that this letter is about a person, Micah, who is a known atheist. So what's the equivocation here? Well, atheists do not have beliefs, religious beliefs, or do not ascribe to a particular religion or belief in God, but that doesn't mean they have no beliefs at all. So that's the fallacious reasoning. The definition of the word beliefs has been shifted, and so shifted by the writer of this letter to say, well, Michael doesn't have any beliefs, so his claim that he was persecuted because of his beliefs has no merit. But of course, he has beliefs, and that's the this is an example then of the fallacy of equivocation. So in an earlier video, we looked at the ARG conditions, A standing for acceptable premises, R standing for premises that are relevant to the conclusion, and G standing for good grounds for the argument that the logic is sound. Let's take a closer look at the ARG conditions to get a better idea from them how to analyze an argument using them. So let's take a look at this argument where the acceptability condition of the premises is does not occur. There can be no meaningful reconciliation of science and religion. I'll tell you why. For one thing, their methods are diametrically opposed. Science admits it has no final answers, while religion claims to have them. And furthermore, science liberates the human spirit, while religion stifles it. So let's first identify the premises here and the conclusion, and then pick apart what the problems are. So, premise 1, science admits it has no final answers. Religion claims it does have final answers. Well, actually, let's make that all of that premise 1. Science admits it has final answers. Religion claims it does. Premise 2, the methods of science and religion are diametrically opposed. Premise 3, science has helped to liberate the human spirit while religion stifles it. So let's look at these premises. Premise 1, science admits it has no final answers while religion claims that it does. We can find counterexamples to both these claims. Some science, admittedly bad science, claiming to have final answers, and it's by no means true that all religions claim to have final answers. Perhaps some do, but that it's too sweeping a statement to make the claim that religion claims to have final answers. Premise 2, what's wrong with it? Their methods are diametrically opposed. Well, premise 2 actually comes from premise 1. If you believe premise 1, then you might be inclined to believe premise 2, but premise 2 requires premise 1 to be true, and we've already picked apart premise 1. And what about premise 3? Science liberates the human spirit, and religion doesn't. Well, we can certainly find counterexamples where science doesn't liberate the human spirit. That's a bit of a stretch, and we can find many examples where religion liberates the human spirit. So this, all of the premises in this argument are none of the premises are acceptable in this argument. So we'd consider this to be a very weak argument. Okay, so let's take a look at this letter to the editor that was written to the World Press Review way back in 1988 as an example of failing the relevancy condition for the premises. I believe the U.S. was justified in withholding UN dues. At least twice, the Soviets withheld dues when they did not approve of UN policy. The foreign press did not get very worked up about that. UN members constantly find fault with the U.S. They abuse us on one hand and expect handouts on the other. Parents of adolescents face similar problems. So let's analyze this argument and point out the premises that are inherent in it. So premise 1, the Soviets have twice withheld UN dues when they did not approve of UN policies. Premise 2, UN members constantly find fault with the U.S. Premise 3, UN members abuse us on one hand and expect handouts on the other. Conclusion, the U.S. was justified because of this, or is justified, in withholding UN dues. So let's take a look at these premises on the next blackboard. Premise 1, the Soviets withheld dues when they didn't approve of UN policy. Well, that premise fails to be relevant because two wrongs don't make a right. Just because they withheld it doesn't mean we can. They were wrong in withholding the dues in that case, in those cases. Premise 2, UN members constantly find fault with the U.S. Well, that may be true, but that is not relevant to why it's permissible for the or acceptable for the United States to have withheld dues in this case. And then premise 3, UN members who abuse us and expect handouts are adolescents. Well, this one fails because, first of all, UN dues are not charity, as the premise claims, and then there's the emotionally loaded language of associating the dues with or associating the handouts with and the abuse with adolescent behavior. There's also a confusing of two things. The dues are one thing, and the handouts, or the so-called handouts, payments made to other countries, are part of the United States, and lots of other wealthy countries provide assistance to less wealthy countries to get their economies going, because it's good for us when their economies do well. They help our economies by purchasing items from our country, and and when their economies are doing well, they're more stable. So the linkage of the dues and the handouts is and what we just talked about are a number of reasons why premise 3 is not relevant. So this whole argument is very weak. Let's take a look at this argument written by famous philosopher Bertrand Russell. Perhaps a little bit dated. It was probably from about 50 years ago, but it's an example of a soundly reasoned argument that satisfies the ARG conditions. Freedom in education, as in other things, must be a matter of degree. Some freedoms cannot be tolerated. I met a lady once who maintained that no child should ever be forbidden to do anything, because a child ought to develop its nature from within. How about its nature to swallow pins? I asked, but regret to say that her answer was mere vituperation. And yet every child, left to itself, will sooner or later swallow pins, or drink poison out of medicine bottles, or fall out of an upper window, or will bring itself to a bad end. At a later stage, boys, when they have the opportunity, will go unwashed, overeat, smoke until they're sick, catch chills from sitting with wet feet, let alone the fact that they will amuse themselves by plaguing elderly gentlemen who may not have Alicia's power of repartee. Therefore, one who advocates freedom in education cannot mean that children should do exactly as they please all day long. An element of discipline and authority must exist. So let's analyze this argument, find the premises and conclusion, and see how it holds up. So premise 1, both younger and older children left to themselves can easily come to physical harm. Older children left to themselves often are annoying to adults. Well, both of these are matters of common knowledge, and so they are acceptable. These two premises are put together to give us premise 3, so children cannot be left alone all day. So premises 1 and 2 are relevant because they are used to support premise 3, and then premise 3 leads to the conclusion that there must be some element of discipline and authority in education. And that conclusion is grounded conclusion is supported by premise 3, which was supported in turn by premises 1 and 2. Notice also that the argument does not go too far. It says there must be some element of discipline and authority in education. It does not say, because of these examples I pointed out, which we all accept, there must be unyielding authority and very harsh discipline. It just says, because of this, we have to have some degree of discipline and authority in education. So this is a well-reasoned argument that satisfies the ARG conditions. So on the next Blackboard, let's wrap up this video by discussing when we should and should not accept premises. So acceptable premises would be ones that are supported by a cogent subargument, such as in the previous example, premises 1 and 2, all those examples of young children coming to harm or causing harm in others, led us to another premise that children cannot be left alone all day long, so they were supported by a cogent subargument. Second example would be of an acceptable premise would be a premise that is supported elsewhere in an earlier argument, or something that is accepted elsewhere. Premises known to be true are acceptable, though all those the two premises in the previous example of young children coming to harm or causing to harm are ones that were known to be true, are known to be true. Premises that are common knowledge are, of course, acceptable. Another type of acceptable premise could be testimony. The testimony must be plausible. It is more believable if the person making it has a good reputation, and the claim must be within the experience or expertise of the expertise set of the person making the claim. We can think of testimony as evidence provided in as it is in a lot of opinion articles, and claims that are made will be subject to the scrutiny of the readers, who may claim that something being stated is outside the experience set, or that the data is incorrect, or etc. So here's where a lot of scrutiny goes, whether it's a testimony of the type that's in courtroom, or statements being made that are subject to the critique that they are not makeable because of the expertise of the person, or it goes beyond the expertise of the person making the claim. One thing that you may want to do when you're reading an opinion piece is, if you don't know whether the premises are acceptable or not, let's say there's a set of premises leading to a conclusion, there's one or two of those premises you're not quite sure about, but you go, okay, well, I'll accept all these premises as okay, and then so I'll accept the argument as being okay because the conclusion follows in cogent fashion from these premises, and so you will provisionally accept the premises, but then go back and check them later. So now let's look on the next blackboard at unacceptable premises. So here we have 5 examples of unacceptable premises. Some of them are easily seen if it's easily refutable, known to be false, inconsistent with the other premises, vaguely stated, the words aren't well defined, or it's not clear what is being implied from the premise, begging the question. Let's take a closer look at that one. So we looked at begging the question earlier when we were looking at fallacies. So this is just when the premises are essentially the conclusion, so or a restatement of the conclusion. So they're trying to manipulate your thinking to a conclusion by just restating that conclusion in one or more different ways to arrive at the same thing you're trying to argue for. So let's conclude this video, being rather long now, and pick up on the next video with how we look at the relevance of premises to the conclusion being made.